The sun was sinking into the jagged teeth of the canyon, throwing long shadows across the stones where the fires of a village had burned only hours before. Smoke still curled into the crimson sky, carrying with it the bitter scent of charred wood and flesh. Amidst the ruin, a young Apache woman knelt, her hands pressed into the blackened earth. Her hair was tangled with ash, her face streaked with tears, and yet her eyes shone with something fiercer than grief. It was the look of someone who had lost everything, but refused to surrender her spirit. She whispered in her native tongue, words meant for the dead, words that promised remembrance, that swore vengeance. Around her lay broken pottery, burned hides, and the shattered remains of lives cut short. Only hours before, this canyon had echoed with laughter and song. Now silence hung heavy, broken only by the groan of settling timbers and the distant call of a raven circling overhead. The woman's shoulders trembled as she pressed her forehead to the ground, breathing in the last traces of her family, vowing to the spirits that she would not rest until justice was done. It was then she felt eyes upon her. Slowly she lifted her face, and through the smoke, she saw him, a lone figure standing on the ridge above. He was tall, dressed in weather-worn buckskins, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow across his face. A rifle hung at his side, a pistol on his hip. Behind him, his horse stood still, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. He did not move closer at first, only watched her with a wariness that came from a life spent in dangerous places. The woman rose unsteadily, her knees weak, but her spirit unbroken. She stepped toward him, clutching a knife in her hand, though she knew it was useless against a man armed with steel. When she was close enough for her broken English to be heard, her voice came low, raw, trembling, but edged with steel. You carry gun, she said, forcing each word past the knot in her throat. You fight strong, you hunt. She lifted her chin, defiance burning in her grief. Take my revenge, hunt men who kill my people. Her hand pressed hard against her chest. If you do this, I be your wife, forever. The frontiersman did not answer right away. He had seen villages like this before, burned by raiders who traded human lives for gold and whiskey. He had heard vows like hers, though never spoken so plainly, never offered with such desperate fire. Her words cut through the canyon air like an arrow. He studied her face, the tear-streaked cheeks, the eyes too old for her years. He saw not just grief, but a spirit that demanded action. A vow made not in weakness, but in a strength born from unbearable loss. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of saddle leather as his horse shifted. The man's gaze turned toward the horizon where the raiders had vanished only hours before, their tracks still fresh in the dust. His jaw tightened. He had no kin here, no stake in Apache lives. Yet something inside him stirred. Perhaps it was the loneliness he carried, the ghosts of battles long past, or the strange honor he lived by. But he knew this much: he could not turn away. Not this time. The woman stood firm, watching him with unblinking intensity. Her vow was more than words. It was a bond sealed with the ashes around them. She had nothing else to give her, people gone, her life torn apart, yet she offered herself in eternal devotion if he would carry out her vengeance. It was not love, not yet, but something far more powerful, an unbreakable oath. The frontiersman stepped forward at last, his boots crunching over charred earth, until he stood only a few paces from her. His voice, when it came, was low and gravelly. Tell me who they were. Her breath caught. For a moment she simply stared, hardly believing he had answered. Then she spoke, her words tumbling in fragments of English and Apache, her hands drawing shapes in the air. She told him of the raiders, Mexican bandits mixed with outlaws from the borderlandsmen who sold captives into slavery, who killed without mercy. She described their leader, a scarred man with a red sash tied around his arm, cruel and ruthless. Her voice broke when she spoke of her brother, cut down while trying to defend their people. Yet, through her grief, she stood tall, demanding vengeance. The frontiersman listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, silence stretched between them, heavy as the canyon walls. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. I'll find them, he said. His hand tightened on the rifle strap across his chest. I'll see it done. No oath was made beyond that, no ceremony, no gesture of promise. But in those words she heard the truth. He would not break his word. Relief and sorrow mingled in her chest as her knees nearly gave way beneath her. She lowered the knife, letting it fall to the dirt at her feet. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Then I am yours." It was not spoken in weakness, but in solemn declaration. She had bound her life to his, just as surely as if she had carved it in stone. The fire in her gaze softened, but did not fade. The canyon seemed to hold its breath as they stood there. Two souls bound by ashes and vengeance, strangers made kin by the blood of the fallen. Above them, the raven gave a harsh cry, as if marking the vow. The frontiersman looked down at her, still hardly believing the force of what had passed between them. He had wandered the borderlands for years, never tethered to land or woman, never allowing himself ties. And yet, in this moment, before the ruins of her village, he felt something he had not known in a long time, a purpose that ran deeper than survival. He reached out, resting a calloused hand lightly on her shoulder. "We ride at dawn," he said, and with that, the vow was sealed, not by church, nor law, but by the ashes of the dead, and the promise of blood yet to be spilled. The chase began at dawn. The raiders' trail wound across dry riverbeds, over jagged mesas, and into the shadow of red cliffs. Each print of a hoof, each broken branch, spoke to the Apache woman as though the earth itself whispered their path. She moved like one born of the land, every step certain, every sign read with ease. The frontiersman followed close, his rifle balanced across his saddle, his eyes sweeping the horizon with the watchfulness of a man who had spent too many years walking into ambushes. Their silence was a language of its own purpose, steady and relentless. By nightfall of the second day, they came upon the ashes of another camp fresh, the embers still glowing faintly. The woman crouched low, pressing her palm to the dirt, her dark eyes narrowing as she read the tracks. 10 men, she whispered, her voice tight. They go west. She touched a small print, lighter than the rest. Captive woman, maybe child. Her jaw clenched as her gaze hardened. The frontiersman said nothing, only adjusted the strap of his rifle. He had hunted men before. He knew the ugliness of what they followed, and he knew there would be no mercy. On the third night, they caught sight of the raiders' fire. Far across the canyon, faint orange flickered against the rock face, shadows moving in cruel laughter. The Apache woman's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the knife she carried. Memories of her brother's blood flashed through her mind, of screams and fire. The frontiersman placed a steadying hand on her arm. His voice came low, certain. "Wait for the dark." She nodded, her lips pressed thin, her spirit burning for what was to come. The night grew deeper, the stars sharp against the sky, and with them came their moment. They descended like ghosts, the canyon wind covering their approach. The frontiersman moved with the deadly patience of a hunter, placing each step with care, while the woman glided beside him, silent as the shadows. When they were close enough to smell the raiders' cooking fire, the man raised his rifle. The crack shattered, the still night. One raider fell before he had time to shout. Chaos erupted. The Apache woman cried out in a piercing war call, her voice echoing through the canyon like the spirit of vengeance itself. Knives flashed, rifles roared, and the stillness of night was torn apart by fury. The fight was brutal, swift, and merciless. The frontiersman fired with deadly precision, each shot claiming a life. The woman darted through the fray, her blade finding flesh, her movements guided by rage and grief. The raiders fought back with desperation, their shouts reverberating against the canyon walls. But they were outmatched by purpose, by fury sharpened into steel. Dust rose, sparks flew, and the canyon became a chamber of death. By the time the stars had wheeled overhead, silence returned. Broken bodies sprawled in the dirt, their fire dying to embers that smoked like the breath of the fallen. When it was over, she stood over the scarred leader, the man with the red sash who had haunted her nights. His eyes, wide with shock, stared lifeless into the sky. Her knife dripped crimson as she whispered in Apache, words older than the stones around them, words of release for her brother, curses for her enemy. The frontiersman stood nearby, watching her shoulders ease as though a burden heavier than stone had been lifted. For the first time since he had seen her in the ashes of her village, her eyes softened, the fire within dimming into tears. She turned slowly, her breath shaking, her chest heaving with exhaustion and relief. Stepping toward him, she placed her small, calloused hand upon his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath buckskin. Her voice, soft yet unyielding, rose in English, broken but clear. "You kept my vow. Now my life is yours." The words trembled in the air, heavier than any oath written on paper, stronger than rings or sermons. She had given him her vow, and he had fulfilled it in blood. Now, she bound herself to him as completely as the stars bound the night sky. The frontiersman said nothing for a moment. He only looked at her, the woman who had carried him across the dust of vengeance, whose strength had matched his own, whose spirit refused to die. In her eyes, he saw more than grief. He saw a future, carved out of fire and loss, a bond forged not in gentleness but in survival. At last, he reached up, covering her hand with his own. His voice came low, rough with something he hadn't felt in years. "Then you are not alone. Nor am I." It was not a promise of romance, but of kinship, of fate intertwined. The sun crested the horizon then, casting the canyon in golden light. The raiders' camp lay silent behind them, the smoke of dying embers curling upward like the last breath of vengeance. Together, they stood on the ridge, looking east as the day was born. The wind swept through the canyon, carrying away the stench of blood, carrying whispers of renewal. For the Apache woman, the fire in her soul had at last found peace. For the frontiersman, the endless wandering of his life had found anchor in a vow spoken among ashes. The bond was sealed, unbreakable. And so they left the canyon together, two figures against the vast emptiness of the frontier, not bound by church, not bound by law, but by blood and promise, by vengeance and survival. The land stretched before them, wild and untamed, holding dangers yet to come. but also the possibility of something neither had dared dream of belonging. In the silence that followed, their footsteps echoed as one, and in that silence, beneath the boundless western sky, a new story began, forged from the vow of a woman and the rifle of a man, a story the frontier would not forget.